Hey there. Recently, Palantir's chief architect Akshay Krishnaswamy did an AMA on LinkedIn. I was able to participate and actually got a couple of my questions answered. So thank you very much, Akshay. I wanted to cover my reaction to Akshay's response. And so with that, let's jump into some of the questions.
Cool. I think there's a question here, which is great, which just came in, which is, can we talk about how Palantir streamlines the data integration process? Also a great question, a very common question too. So this is something that I think we have kind of an interesting perspective on because the Pebble was really in our shoe from the very early days, working with our first customers in.
A pebble was in our shoes. That is a big understatement. Data integration is like a boulder in your shoes. It's such a big pain point. Thus, my question. My basic thesis is that you have two main bottlenecks when it comes to going from raw data to insights. That's data engineering and that's data science. And so for every data scientist, it's going to be yes, a pebble, but probably more like a boulder that's weighing you down. So let's hear more about how Palantir is tackling this.
Defense and intelligence about, how do we actually nuts and bolts make data integration smoother for people who are on the front lines doing mission critical work. And there's kind of a theoretical aspect of how you think about data integration, getting, by some quantitative metric better or, hitting better KPIs over time. Then there's the reality of, is this actually making a difference to somebody who it has to make a difference for in the field or on, in a factory setting or wherever it might be. And so we've thought a lot about kind of operations backwards. What are the things you need to streamline data integration? And, a couple things that I think.
Actually, that's actually a really good point. What I find is that oftentimes the infrastructure and integration work that goes into setting up data pipelines, it happens early on in the process, and then it's like maybe 3 months, 6 months for that data to surface in some operational environment. And sometimes you just don't know what the end users are looking for in that data, how they're using it, and to try to work backwards is something, it's a little bit tricky. So I appreciate that comment because I think it is sometimes missed in terms of going back and seeing what parts of the data are really valuable to the end users rather than what was set up originally. So I think that's a very good point.
I think I'll highlight here, which we can of course go in depth on in follow-on sessions, are for systems that we've seen over and over again as an organization, as Palantir. How can we basically understand the ways to progressively automate the integration from those systems? So for those of you that have seen our hyper auto presentations and the content out there, that's our sort of what I think of as our skeptical kind of one step at a time attempt to get automation to a point where we can trust it for operations. So it's not just saying, hey, we're going to do a simple sort of schema transposition or some sort of simple kind of kind of like what I call is like a heuristic way of kind of doing data integration from these complex ERPs, which are often very customized for customers. But can we actually write the proper native integrations with those systems that do dynamic inference across not just sort of the standard modules, but custom libraries as well? So you can actually say in an afternoon or in a couple of days, I could integrate a complex ERP estate, which might be 26 ERPs under the hood. It might be one giant ERP under the hood. It might be several vendors under the hood. And so we think about streamlining it from that perspective through HyperAuto with just speed to value, and where that output is not just another set of golden tables, but is an ontology you can actually use to drive business process and workflows with as well. So I think that's one aspect, right, which is how does the HyperAuto framework help us really get to value faster? And we're trying to, again, expand that in a judicious but efficient and fast manner to all types of systems that people are working with in different domains where we think that intelligence can be useful. The other things I'll add in here, kind of at the data integration layer, include being able to build in kind of all the things that we wanted as engineers, kind of as a wish list, sort of in that integration layer of the platform. So things like, I don't want to have to go to a different tool to do data quality checks and monitor data health. Can I actually have that right on top of the data itself in the platform, taking advantage of the distributed compute engine, so I can actually do full cardinality checks. Is something late? Or is the cardinality of these values wrong? Even more sophisticated checks that can integrate with external systems on whether or not I should allow these pipelines to refresh or not.
This is actually a big deal. Once your model goes into production, you want to be continually monitoring the data pipelines that is feeding that model. Oftentimes, what you have is you have a set of assumptions for that particular model, and if any one of those assumptions, depending on how critical the variable is to the model, it could really throw off your model. And so, as a data scientist, you're very mindful of trying to monitor the overall quality of that data that's coming in. So, I really like this point. This is a strong point.
So data health is a big component here. And then I think another thing which we think of as sort of unlocking collaboration generally is having a really robust security framework, right? So you can never really do that much with data integration at scale if you're always limited or concerned about whether or not it's secure, right, fundamentally. And so we've tried to build the right.
This is such an important point. There is a lot of collaboration that is lost in data science because A, we don't have the right tools to do that. So how do I get somebody to comment on my model? We don't have like a Google Docs for that just yet. There are some tools that are coming out for that, but more importantly is that you oftentimes need to share data that can be sensitive to other people. So that's either third-party consultants, external partners, or other people from other departments that maybe don't have the same level of clearance or authority as you do. And if you can't share that data, you can't share the insights, that is going to really put a strain on collaboration and the free flow of ideas and best practices. So this point is really, really, really key. Great point.
Primitives and assumptions into the platform that allow you to go fast, but do so safely. And you can say the
go fast, but do so safely. That is very catchy. I think that's a very strong line. You should probably lead with that. Foundry or whatever, if your platform, whatever your platform is, we allow you to go fast but do so safely. I think that's really good.
The entitlements or the security sort of permissions that I put in place, whether those are role-based access controls, classification-based access controls, purpose-based access controls, will actually by default do this secure, insane thing of actually kind of percolating with the data, with the models, with the workflows. And so that's built into the data integration layer, which then empowers, again, folks to actually collaborate in ways that we think is very different than in systems where you're just kind of locking down kind of a subdirectory or some sort of set of tables. So there's a lot more I could go into, but we think a lot about kind of the feature set in that part of the platform, the data integration part, as what gets us to operations and value as fast as possible and gets us to meaningful outcomes as fast as possible. And I think one thing we can talk about later is, it's very feedback driven. So how are end users telling you whether or not the data actually is in good shape or not, right? You might think it's great from the data engineering side forward, but you might understand from an end user it's actually missing the mark. And so how are they empowered to give you feedback and to actually give you sort of requests or kind of granular guidance on how they want to adjust the pipelines over time to make things better?
I would love to see that. That is super key. As a data engineer, you want to be, I guess, sensitive to how your end users are consuming your data, what they want. I wonder how they're doing that, if it's sort of some sort of ticketing system within Foundry so that if I'm, say, a manager on a factory floor, I can set up a ticket and just send it to the data engineer that's in charge of it? Or are there sort of certain analytics that are being produced that I can see as a data engineer, like what data is being used, how it's being cut up, what what errors are being presented? So it'd be interesting to see how exactly they're doing that, but I think that's a very compelling concept.
Cool.
All right, so some interesting points there. They have the hyper auto reference around how to use dynamic inference to quickly speed up data integration for existing use cases, existing systems. So that's very interesting. I've heard a lot of good things about hyper auto. You should check that out. He also touched on data quality and having tools within the Foundry ecosystem to check the quality of your overall pipelines. That's super key. And then number 3, like I feel like you have to give a little bit more prominence to number 3 is allowing you to go fast while staying safe. That is a very important concept. That's something that's lacking right now in data science, the ability to collaborate across different types of permissions. That is super key. So I really like that response. I think that was very strong. So now let's go to my second question, which is around the second bottleneck that I see in helping firms go from data to insights, and that's the data science part. So let's jump to that.
Let's take a look at one last question here, which is, can you talk about model ops for data scientists? Do you support R or R Studio, and how would Foundry make the life of a data scientist easier? Yeah, this is an awesome question. And so I think it's kind of very analogous to how we think about the data integration piece that we talked about so far, where people often say like, oh, do I have to just do everything in Foundry? Or like, is this the only, like, is it basically a rip and replace if I want to go here? Very much not the case, right? So I think the first thing that we've tried to think about is, the joke that I have internally is if you ask people at Palantir what data science tooling they like to use, like our data scientists or our forward deployed engineers, you ask 5 people, you'll get 10 answers, right? People love to use Data IQ, Data Robot, SageMaker, Azure ML, Vertex AI. Like, there's a lot of great tools out there.
Not only are there a lot of great tools out there, but there are also many languages that different data scientists like to use. I talked about R and R Studio, so that's a popular one. Python is very popular. Julia is also getting very popular. So languages can vary too. But the other thing that can vary too is the type of algorithm that you're going to be using for a particular problem. So you might use XGBoost, you might use Random Forest, and there are maybe 1,000 different algorithms that you can use. And then for each one of those algorithms, there are many factors or parameters that you might hypertune to get a different result for that particular algorithm. So there's a lot of variation in the data science world, and that's actually one of the big problems. But it's interesting that he starts off by that, because I think that's a really good call. My sense is that the way that they're going about this is they're going to make sort of a happy sandbox for a data scientist where you can be fairly comfortable with the data and the quality and being comfortable with that data coming into whatever ideal tool you have. And then you're probably going to be able to deploy this somewhere and see how it performs. So let's hear a little bit more here.
Right. And so we try to be very specific about where can we add value in a very kind of growing organic landscape. And we think about it in 2 ways, right? The first is we want to provide clean, consistent access to data that's governed and that's semantic to those model builders, right? So, we don't want data scientists spending we didn't like spending 80% of our time having to munch through data as we built models, right?
Still, one of the biggest pain points for data scientists is all the data wrangling and cleaning that comes with the job. I kid you not, it's probably still 80% of the average data scientist's job. Like, it should be like the number one thing that you see in job requirements. It's not, unfortunately, but still a ton of time gets spent on this. So when he talks about the area where to add value, that's a big one. That's a big one.
Right. So how can we provide clean, consistent hooks into the ontology so you can build features, train your models, and do that from any environment that you want to, right? Using APIs, using SDKs, using direct secure file system access if that's what you need. And so we provide like a code workbook environment, which is effectively a Jupyter-style, notebook-style environment for building out models end-to-end in Foundry as well. And you can use that. Great. You can also choose
that actually, for many data scientists will be familiar with Python and Jupyter, so I think that covers, like, that's a really good, just basic vanilla option. And I'm sure there's going to be like more sophisticated tools that you can plug into. But as a basic out-of-the-box option, Jupyter, Python, totally reasonable.
Choose to connect any of your other tools to the data in Foundry and use those as well. And many people prefer to do that. And so the data access point and being able to securely kind of be able to tap into the power of the ontology is the first thing that we think is interesting from a data science enablement perspective, right? In addition to kind of all of the model building, model ops stuff you could do in Foundry, analogous to what you can do in other systems as well. The second thing that we think is more interesting and just as important as sort of data access, data quality is what is the path to production for models, right? I've built a model somewhere else. It's great. If I built it in Foundry, I'm excited to use it. How do I now deploy it?
Sorry, very painful as well. Deploying a model, like a lot of models will die just before deployment. There's a lot of work that gets done on people's individual environments, cloud notebooks, computers, and they look great. And then you try to push it to production, and it's super painful for a number of reasons. But this is a really key point here.
Directly into an operational application and start to actually get into a feedback loop, me as the data scientist with operational users.
Feedback loop, that's one of the biggest value drivers of AI and machine learning. I push a model, that model pushes insights or predictions to an end user. That end user will either take action on that insight or not, but I need to know whether or not that insight was valuable to that end user or got me some result, because then I can take that and plow it back into my model development process and build a better model the next go around and get even better performance. And if I do that over many iterations, that model gets really, really good. So for data scientists, the faster you're able to get into that feedback loop cycle, the better. So that's big.
And we think like that's the chasm that's really hard to cross, right? Because there's so many different dimensions to doing that. Where if you think about like, okay, what data did I train my model on? Who signed off on the model? How do I actually inject that model into the application? What's the sort of mechanism for getting feedback on the model recommendations that might be appearing to a user in an application? How does the application builder know how to insert that into the application they've built? It's a really high bar, and I think people who have done this know it's very complicated. And so
True, very complicated. It's a major chasm.
we try to really say that, through what we call as the model objectives framework in Foundry, or the mission objectives framework, you can think about effectively having this whole promotion process that goes from competing potentially dozens of different models from different providers built in different places or more against a given objective, choosing a model that will then win, sort of like gladiator style. And then you say, and this can happen through automation or through manual curation, and then allowing the model that you want to actually insert into workflows have a binding to the ontology.
Interesting. It's almost like a battle royale for models, and you see a similar type of concept working within what we would call auto ML platforms like Data Robot, like H2O. Essentially, they'll have you put in data and a target, and they'll run a number of different algorithms and parameters for each of those algorithms, and they'll tell you the best combination of those algorithms and parameters, and then you select that one, and that's the one that you go with. And so it's almost like Palantir is trying to do that for all these different AutoML providers, which you're going to see a lot more of. Everybody's doing AutoML now. AWS has a lot of AutoML capabilities. H2O I mentioned, Data Robots, GCP, Azure. AutoML is becoming very popular. So if they can sit on top of that and just take the best one that works from each one of those platforms, that's pretty interesting.
So it's almost like a type system for models where you say, I'm now going to consistently call this model with certain inputs from the ontology and Foundry, and then in a parameterized way, those the return values from the model will also enrich the ontology. And you're kind of doing this sort of like binding between models and operational layer, which means that if you then want to insert those models into different applications or workflows throughout Foundry, using the low code, the pro code, the no code application builders, or things you're building to the APIs, there's a very consistent way to do that. And so, and as people give you feedback, it's collected. If models are promoted, people who are downstream of that will be aware of the fact that the model has changed. It's building the connective tissue between the model builders and the operational folks and the data folks as well that we think is really powerful in Foundry. And we think that's very complementary to all the tools out there, which is why we're partners with folks like, the AWS SageMakers, the Data Robots, and others out there.
Awesome. That's great. So key takeaway there is that there's not a ton of value right now to creating new AI or data science tooling to do the actual data science work. And that there's a lot of great players in that space. We already mentioned some of them. The value is really in making sure that you have high quality data pipelines set up to feed those models. And two, and having a way to productionalize those models and operationalize them and get them into the hands of users. And that's 100% right. Those are still two major pain points for data scientists. So to the extent that Palantir can get that right and other platforms can get that right, I'm all for that. I want to see more of that. That's going to be great. So I hope you enjoyed this commentary. If you liked it, feel free to like, subscribe, and share this and add comments. What did I get wrong? What did you find interesting? I recorded the entire AMA section. I'll provide a link to that in the description below. but I would really appreciate your commentary as well. I think that's super helpful. I think I really like this type of content from vendors and platform providers. My sense is that really you want two options. You either want a technical person to be talking about things like this, which is great, or you want demos of working software. And at least as a data science practitioner, as a machine learning professional, those are the things that appeal to me. So I would love to see more of this content from Palantir and some of the other data platform vendors that are out there. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.